Hi everyone, welcome back to English 221. This is for our class for Monday, the 13th of February, where we are putting some closure onto the sonnets and moving into Shakespearean dramas, specifically the comedies. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the comedies and get us ready for A Midsummer Night's Dream, which happens to be the first Shakespearean comedy that we will be reading. In terms of the sonnets, we have a journal due, and that would be due today if you are watching this on the 13th. That would be due at 11:59 p.m. via PDF to my email, which is ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. That's how my grading program works best. And what I will do is send that back to you to your email address. And as you know, I had indicated that you can write about all of the sonnets, or you can elect to write about just a few of the sonnets, or even just one of the sonnets in depth. I'm thinking about a page or so of response, but as long or as short as you'd like it to be. And I don't evaluate for grammar or mechanics, just for content. And you could even do bullet points if you so wanted to, so that this is a place where you could put thoughts and reflections and questions more than just plot. And certainly feel free to discuss some of the things that I've brought up in class videos or some of the elements that have been discussed in discussion forum questions. And that said, we move forward into our Shakespearean comedies. What would be ideal, though I understand the world isn't always ideal, is that you would have finished reading A Midsummer Night's Dream, so that as we are talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream for the next couple of weeks, you are on our next drama, which happens to be Much Ado About Nothing. But as I indicated, I also wanted us to spend some time talking and watching about or watching performance, so that we'll begin with the Midsummer with performance, a performance that was actually done in Shakespeare's Globe Theater. So that gives you a bit of time to finish up with the play if you haven't already done so. And we believe that Shakespeare wrote most of his comedies towards the earlier part of his career. Usually, the comedies are seen as much less complex than the tragedies. They don't necessarily focus on a central figure. So, if you think about the tragedies, how they are usually named after a particular character: Macbeth, Othello, King Lear. But instead, when we get to the comedies, they have much more general titles. It's more of an ensemble cast. We do know that the comedies are somewhat similar to what we think of in contemporary times as a rom-com. That, yes, there is humor, much as we think of with comedy, but more importantly, the major element of a Shakespearean comedy is that it's about love, all of the misunderstandings associated with love, and there has to be a happy resolution at the end. And that would mean either marriage or the promise of marriage. You can decide whether or not that's a happy resolution. But we would have no death. There would also be a good amount of music and dance. That's something that you oftentimes lose when you're just reading the play and not watching a production. We think that many times these comedies were performed immediately or after wedding ceremonies as entertainment. So the music and the dance helps to establish the mood. So, A Midsummer Night's Dream might be a play that you are familiar with. It is oftentimes done in English classes. One of the reasons why is because it has a fantasy element associated with it. Now, when we get to Much Ado About Nothing, our second comedy, we'll see that it is firmly grounded in reality. So, if you're not a fan of fantasy necessarily, hang on until we get to Much Ado About Nothing. That said, as I've often said to students, if you can accept premises like science fiction, then you can accept things like fairies as well. The plot is notoriously confusing because love is notoriously confusing. So Shakespeare does this very deliberately when we're given multiple subplots, but they all connect with one another. Even if they don't seem on the surface like they might connect, they do connect. And in addition to the humor and the music and the dance, expect some social and political commentary. So even though it might appear somewhat superficial, once we get beneath the surface, we'll see that the themes can be quite complex. In some ways, I think the sonnets have prepared us for that as well, the idea of the multiple meanings that could be embedded within the text. A Midsummer Night's Dream is also a little bit unusual in that the fifth act, the ending act, might seem to be superfluous. It happens to be about a play that's being performed. This is very Shakespearean, to have a play within a play. It's a way for him to make commentary about what we've just seen and also about play acting. So even though the fifth act might seem to be superfluous, trust me, it'll be as important as any of the other acts. And I had talked about the five act structure with Shakespearean plays that are much like a pyramid, that you can expect that the first act, which would be on the left side of the pyramid at the bottom, would be an introduction to characters. And then the second act would be a rising of tension and conflict. And the third act, which would be the very top of the pyramid, the point, that would be the height of conflict, which we will see with the Midsummer Night's Dream. And then we will begin to see descent with Act 4 and then resolution with Act 5. And as I said, it almost seems as if resolution occurs in A Midsummer Night's Dream in Act 4. But trust me, Act 5 is just as important for the resolution. So in terms of this particular play, I wanted to draw your attention, and you can see this in the notes below, to some of the characters that you are going to be introduced to at the beginning of the play. First, one couple, Theseus and Hippolyta, they are engaged to be married. Basically, they represent a kind of typical love because this is a love of conquest, where Theseus basically conquered Hippolyta's people, who happen to be Amazons, who are known as a strong female warrior tribe. Another couple that we're introduced to, and they're dating rather than just engaged. Hermia and Lysander, they are quite in love, but their dilemma is that Hermia's father, Aegeus, does not support their love. This is kind of an atypical love because the daughter, Hermia, continues to defy her father. Even though in the time of the Renaissance it was assumed that a daughter would listen to her father's will because a daughter would be viewed as a kind of property. Now, Helena and Demetrius, they're a couple that we're introduced to. Prior to the play, they were a couple. When the play begins, they're no longer together because Demetrius is no longer interested in Helena. He's interested in Hermia, which is particularly problematic, not only because Hermia loves somebody else, Lysander, but also because Hermia and Helena are best friends, though we'll see that tested as the play goes on. Again, very deliberate that we have female characters with very similar names with H's, Hermia and Helena, so it's easy to get them confused because part of Shakespeare's commentary will be that love is confusing and that love is fickle and one partner is just as good as another. And while Demetrius and Lysander have different names, they have very similar kinds of personalities. At least Hermia and Helena have physical differences between them. Hermia is the short brunette. Helena is the tall blonde. And at this point, Aegeus has decided that he would prefer Demetrius with his daughter. But there really isn't a good reason for this. This is more of a power play than anything else. And what we will also be introduced to are a land of fairies, and that will require us to suspend a little bit of disbelief. We get Fairy Oberon and Fairy Titania. They are in the married state of relationship. Notice we get different states of relationship, from dating to engaged to finally married. They are bickering over the control of a changeling child, which we will talk about in greater depth over the next several classes. Their love is very much a controlling love. We're also introduced to a bottom character because he represents the bottom of the social scale. He is a laborer, but also because he acts like a bottom or an ass. And he is single, and he and his friends are putting on a play within a play that happens to be about love. Because again, the play that we are watching happens to be about love. And right from the very beginning in the first act, we're introduced to the idea of power struggles associated with love. And King Theseus, who has his own love problems with Hippolyta, he has conquered her and they're going to get married, but she's not particularly enthusiastic at this point. King Theseus has appealed to by Hermia's father, Aegeus, to make Hermia listen to her father's will. And King Theseus basically requires Hermia to do so, but allows Hermia a bit of time to think about her options. Because if she doesn't follow her father's will, her options are nunnery or death, which again would not have been atypical during the time of the Renaissance. This is necessary to provide us with some time for the plot to unfold, but I think it also is thematically significant because, as I said, King Theseus, being a ruler with his own complicated love issues, probably does not want to get involved. And the setting, keep in mind, it will have a great deal of importance in this play. That in the beginning, the setting is in Athens, in the city, which is supposed to represent civilization order. It wasn't unusual for Shakespeare to place his plays in other cultures, but they may as well be in Britain because outside of setting it in Athens, it very much looks and feels like we are in Britain, but it gives an exotic element to it. But Athens is where we start. This is the law of man. And then the play moves into the woods, the wilderness, where things are wild and untamed. Because basically, Hermia and Lysander decide in the time that they have to consider their options to run away together into the woods so they can be with one another. Demetrius ultimately follows Hermia into the woods, and Helena ultimately follows Demetrius into the woods. And it turns out that Bottom and his cohorts are rehearsing in the woods because they don't want to be overheard or seen by others. This gets all of our major characters into the woods. Fairy Oberon is going to order his servant fairy, Puck, who is perhaps the most famous character in the drama, to use this love juice in order to distract and humiliate Fairy Titania so that Oberon can basically take that boy. Again, the power struggles. And it would appear that somehow or some way Oberon feels a little bit of empathy for Helena as he is watching her in the woods with Demetrius, because he's ordered Puck to put the love juice in Demetrius's eyes so that he will fall in love with Helena the way he once did. I recommend that you might want to keep a chart of all of these love relationships because, again, they are notoriously confusing. One of the things that Puck will independently do is turn Bottom into an ass. And then Fairy Titania will fall in love with this Bottom the ass because of fairy juice. And then Puck, perhaps mistakenly, puts the love juice on Lysander instead of Demetrius. So now Lysander loves Helena. And when they rectify the error and put the love juice on Demetrius, it's never removed from Lysander. So basically the middle of the play is with both men, Lysander and Demetrius, in love with Helena. The exact opposite of how the play begins, which is both men, Lysander and Demetrius, in love with Hermia. Keep in mind that Helena's the tall blonde, which would have been considered to be the epitome of beauty at the time, and Hermia's the short brunette. So that gives you a little bit of an overview, but as I am fond of saying, Shakespeare's meant to be performed. And this particular performance, which was done in 2014 in the Globe Theatre in London, I think is particularly good. All performances take some liberties, but I think you get a sense of realism just because of our setting. And that said, the difficulty with this particular production is copyright, that you can't find it online. But luckily, the GCC library is to the rescue, in that they are able to stream it to us for a period of time. So this is a bit of an experiment, but if you look in the section that's titled 10 or X below, you will see that there is information from our literacy coordinator, Tim Dolan of the library, that you should be receiving. In fact, you should have already received a Google Drive invitation to view this film, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Please note that you will you will need to be logged into your student Google account in order to view the file. And access to the film comes with certain limitations. It'll be available only until February 27th. So what we will do over the next couple of classes is I will set aside those classes for you to view the film. And you can't download the film, unfortunately. You do need a strong internet connection to watch this film. English subtitles are hard-coded into the video, so you can't turn them off. I actually think it's an excellent idea to watch Shakespeare with the subtitles on so that you can read as you are actually watching the performance. If you are having difficulty accessing the film, there's information about how you can contact the library, whether it be through email, their phone, their online chat services. There also is a DVD of the film in the GCC library if you wanted to ask for the hard copy and watch it in the library itself. And of course, Tim Dolan's information is here as well. So this is what I recommend, that you watch Act 1 and Act 2. And Act 1, Scene 1 is 16 minutes. Act 1, Scene 2 is 9 minutes. Act 2, Scene 1 is 17 minutes. Act 2, Scene 2 is 12 minutes. So I think that would be a good place to stop for our first class. But again, I understand this is an experiment. So for our class attendance question, which will be due on Wednesday the 15th at 8 a.m., though certainly if you need an extension, just ask me. Based on how much you're able to watch of the performance, and again, I suggest that you get to Act 2, Scene 2, if at all possible. Which actor's performance did you like the best? I'm not necessarily talking about character, I'm talking about acting. Which actor's performance did you like the best in the 2014 Shakespeare on Screen production, and why? Of course, if you're also having difficulty accessing the video, you can contact me as well. As I said, this is a little bit of an experiment, but we tried it last semester and it was successful, so I'm hopeful that the same will occur now. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. Next class, I'll talk a little bit more about Midsummer Night's Dream and give you some suggested places to begin and end your viewing of the 2014 production. But that'll be for next class. Take care. Bye-bye.